Hi, folks. I'm Doug Perks. I'm the historian here at the Jefferson County Museum. I'd like to welcome you in. We're making history today. This is the first time that I have done one of these programs via Zoom. And of course, I'm sure many of us are in that position. And I want to give a big thanks to our curator, Sarah Houston, because she set all this up. And fortunately, she's just off to my right so that in case something happens, she can get me out of trouble. I guess I feel a little bit like James Rumsey the first time he took a trip up the Potomac River on his steamboat. So here we go. We'll see how things work, and I'll try to do this as flawlessly as possible. Now, what I'm going to do, when I came to the museum in 2004, all of our photographs were stored in one 4-drawer file cabinet. And if any of you visited the museum in 2004, 2010, 2015, before we reconfigured, the file cabinet was in the center. Yes. Hello. The file cabinet was in the center of the room, and it was my job to begin to transfer the photographic records from sometimes typed sheets, handwritten sheets, into a Microsoft file. At that time, we had a very small collection, about 1,500 photographs, and it's grown immensely. Today, we have over 28,000 photographs. Anyway, photographs, of course, are an accurate record of that place in time. They also give us the opportunity to tell stories about people, places, and things here in our area. And that's what I'm going to do today. I've done 3 or 4 or 5 of these programs, and I've taken from each of them some of my favorites. And as I show you those pictures, we'll talk a little bit about them, and hopefully you might pick up something that you didn't know about Mr. Jefferson's County. Now, I see many of you are muted, and that's okay. But what I'd like you to do, if you have a question, ask the question as we're going. So I'll kind of pause after I finish a frame. If anybody has any question, let's do that then. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions. But I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I forget where I parked my car. So it's probably more important to ask the question when it pops in your mind than it is to wait till the end. So we'll do that. Any questions so far? All right, here we go.
Where are you?
Okay, here we are. Now, program today is Changing Faces. Usually Mr. Jefferson County, but this time it's going to be my, yes.
I don't have that set up yet.
Somebody needs to mute. I can hear you. Unmute if you have a question.
Yeah. I'm muted.
So we'll talk about first, this doesn't happen by accident. We've got this collection here at the museum because of several people, and I want to introduce you to a few of them. The first person is really the person that made this whole thing possible. This is a portrait of Elsie Bogardus Murphy. Was Simon James Murphy, and he started out in Maine, big in the timber industry, eventually big in the petroleum industry. And the bottom line is he made a lot of money. His granddaughter, Elsie Bogardus Murphy, ended up here in Jefferson County, and the family purchased Claymont. That was their home. As a matter of fact, I have a picture postcard that was sent from there during Christmas with a Christmas scene, and it says the Murphy home. So when Colonel Murphy and his family lived at Claymont, they didn't call Claymont, they called it the Murphy home. She became one of the leading philanthropists in Charlestown. She lived here periodically, lived other places because, of course, she had the means to do so. But she always had a soft spot for Charlestown, for Jefferson County, and was very liberal with her money.
Hey, Meg,
This,
I can't see me and I can't hear Dad. Can you
somebody is talking and they need to mute. I think that's my wife. Okay, this building is near the corner of Samuel and Washington Street, and it was for a long time the office of Dr. James M. Ranson, who was a dentist. Dr. Ranson first started practicing where the town of Charlestown has their offices on the corner of George and Washington Street. But in 1891, he bought this little building
down
and set up his dentistry
mute, and
practice.
I clicked on that.
Hey, Meg.
And up by my name, when you click on it, it
Meg,
says mute.
mute your mother.
He doesn't have.
Mute your mother. Anyway,
No, he doesn't have
Dr. Ranson was there and sold the building just before he died in 1919 to a family.
Can I leave and come back and see what happened?
Hold on a second. Okay, how can I mute them?
Hey, Sherry, you need to mute yourself because we're hearing you on the podcast. On Zoom. Oh, well, it's not ready. I'm just trying to. It's up yeah, it's up on the right hand corner. Yeah, Doug said, mute your button, Sherry. Okay, bye. I can't hear him. He can't hear me. Or he can hear me, but I can't hear him. Yeah, we're all hearing you. Okay, thanks. Bye. Sorry, no problem.
All right. Now, so Dr. Ranson sold the building to a woman, Mary Guy Wilson. And in 1921, the Jackson Perks American Legion Post number 71 decided they wanted a building, and they purchased a building from Mary Guy Wilson. And you can see, look at here. Look, see the similarity. There's the chimney that you see here. So this is Dr. Ranson's office. This is about 1921. The American Legion called this their post home. They had big plans. They were talking about removing this building, building a larger building that would have an auditorium, a meeting space, a library. The town had a community building at the time, and the library was there, the Red Cross. So kind of, if you're familiar with Charlestown in the 1940s and 1950s, there was a community building there at the time, Board of Education. So the Jackson Perks Post was going to do the same thing here. Parade, there's a Boy Scout band out front, and you see all these vets, including 2 Civil War vets here on the left. This is Dr. Neal, who was the doctor in World War I for the veterans and certified their physical wellness. So Miss Elsie purchased this building in 1927, and this is what she turned it into. Now, this is the library that I was familiar with when I was a kid. in third grade, I had Dorothy Conklin, and in those days, we kept track of how many library books you read. And one year in her class, I read the most, and my gift was a library card to the Charlestown Library. So this is the library that I grew up with. At that time, there was well, I think it was $1 for the library card. Of course, today there are no charges to use the facility. Miss Elsie came through again, and this is a photograph from September of 1965. The old library building is removed. The house on the corner was removed, and the citizens of Jefferson County raised the funds to build this Jefferson County Civic Center. Of course, this is the present day library on the first floor. The Chamber of Commerce had offices here in 1965, and also the beginning of the Jefferson County Museum. This was the first time that the Jefferson County Museum existed. There had been several places where relics were around Charlestown, especially at the courthouse. One of the biggest that came to the museum in 1965 was the Sadler Light Freight Wagon, which carried John Brown to his execution on December 2nd, 1859. This is the man speaking here at the podium, is Mr. Thomas Steptoe, who at that time was president of the board of directors of the old Charlestown Library Corporation. So we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Miss Elsie. You know, her generosity provided first for this building, the old library, and then second, she gave the nod. There was some recalcitrance on the part of folks to tear down the old library and put up something new. But Miss Elsie said she thought that was a good idea, gave money, and here we are. Any questions? Okay, doke. Now, let's talk about some of the people who've contributed. Oh, maybe 10 years ago, fella came into the museum. His name is Bobby Orndorff, and he always had a pile of pictures. And one day he brought pictures in that had this library letterhead on it, Old Charlestown Library, Charlestown, West Virginia, Jefferson County. And you can see it's a picture of the library. And there were several of them. He'd come in, he'd bring more. Eventually, we discovered that this was a photographic album of Jefferson County taken in the 1930s and 1940s. The connection to the library was a woman by the name of Mary Taylor Wilson Miller. She was married to Dr. Miller. She and her sister, Carrie Bell Wilson, came to Jefferson County in the early 1900s. She married Dr. Miller and became very actively involved in Charlestown, served on the library board, was the acting librarian for many, many, many years. But what she and her sister did, what Mary and Carrie did, they began to go around Jefferson County and take photographs of historic places, of course, starting here. And in many cases, not one to spend a lot of money, they pasted the photographs on this letterhead that belonged to the Charlestown Library. This is Prospect Hill. This is one of 3 houses built by grandsons of John Augustine Washington, brother of General Washington, who owned land here in first Frederick, then Berkeley, then Jefferson County. And John Augustine didn't build here. His grandsons did. And this is a house built on that land by Richard Henry Lee Washington. It's called Prospect Hill, and it's in the vicinity of where Blakely, built by John Augustine, and Claymont, built by Bushrod Corbin, are today. So those 3 brothers built houses near each other. I'm glad that they got this picture because the house isn't here today. Several years ago, Walter Washington inquired if we had a picture, and to my understanding, this may be the only picture of Richard Henry Lee Washington's house, Prospect Hill. Unfortunately, we got 116 pictures in that photograph album, but we don't have a picture of Mary Miller or Carrie Wilson that we can verify. Now, this is an unidentified woman. She's, of course, holding a John Brown Pike, and she's standing in front of the old Charlestown Library. But boy, oh boy, all the great pictures, 116 of them of places in the 1930s and 40s. What a gift, what a treasure it is for our museum. I just wish that we had a picture of those two women that we could definitely say, this is Mary and this is Carrie. You know, they also, perhaps at the same time, they visited many, and I mean many, county cemeteries and created an index of standing headstones. That work was the basis for a book that was published by the DAR called Tombstone Inscriptions, and is a tremendously valuable resource for genealogists so that they can identify where their folks are and get the demographic information. Any questions? This is a gentleman that lived here, died several years ago. This is Ray Parks, and he is at Piedmont, and that is Miss Louise Briscoe. The Briscoe family was at Piedmont from the 1780s until Miss Louise died, and then the property went away in the 1980s. But Ray Park walked around Charlestown every day, long walk. And he took his camera with him and periodically would take snaps. And one of the things that he did was to capture spaces that are no longer here. Now, longtime Charlestown residents know that this is the site of Hyman Viner's junkyard. It's on George Street, just north of the old B&O Railroad. And this is what is here today. This is the APIS building that you see today. It's there with the libraries there. I think it's their financial services building. But many thanks to Ray Parks and his photograph collection, because he captured a lot of buildings which are no longer standing in Charlestown and give us that great photographic record. This is Mr. Edwin Fitzpatrick. He was a professional photographer, also did a lot of photographic work out at Charlestown races. And one of the things that he did was to make copies of old photographs. His son very graciously gave us his father's collection of photographs, and this is among them. Now, those of you who have lived here for a while know that this, of course, is Fairfax Boulevard.
Yes,
Right? This house here was built by A.D. Goetz, G-O-E-T-Z. And Mr. Goetz built this complex here. This was the location of the harness factory in Charlestown. In the 1890s, this was one of the first industries to come to Charlestown. The Goetzes were in Pennsylvania. They moved to Charlestown and started the harness factory. In this iteration, it is now, or when this photograph was taken, building was owned by R.J. Funkhauser, and eventually he had his operations there. Today, of course, this home is the location of the Melvin T. Strider Colonial Funeral Home. So this is 3rd Avenue, the Goetz Harness Factory, and then Dixie Narco, and Mr. Goetz's home, and now today the location of Melvin T. Strider Funeral Home. In the 1970s, Mr. Fitzpatrick took numerous black and white photographs of historic homes in Jefferson County, and most of them found their way into the book published by the Historical Society called Between the Shenandoah and Potomac. So if any of you have a copy of that book, Between the Shenandoah and Potomac, this house is in here. This is Locust Hill. It was built by one of Samuel Washington's granddaughters. She married a Packet. So this is the Packet farm. And you see this little obelisk here with the number 20 on it. This was the site for an 1864 Civil War battle, the Battle of Cameron's Depot. And this house, the back edge here, was pockmarked by bullets. Unfortunately, in 1972, the house burned to the ground. And today, if you go play golf at Locust Hill Golf Course, this is the tee for hole number 12. The marker number 20 was removed, and it's now in the library, or in the museum, I'm sorry, in the museum. But this is Locust Hill, the Packet House, photograph taken by Mr. Ed Fitzpatrick. And again, many thanks to his son, Ed Jr., for giving that collection to the museum. Questions? Okay. Now, some of my favorite photographs, it's hard to even figure out where this thing is, but this is a house called Paradise. And the street down here at the bottom of the photograph is North George Street. And if I were standing on the courthouse lawn and looking across the street at Charles Washington Hall, that's where this house was located. So this is a sidewalk on the west side of North George Street. And here's a little alley. Today, that's where the Washington Street artists have their location. But as you can see, this is a pretty imposing house. It was owned by the Folk family. They came from Harpers Ferry to Charlestown and operated it as kind of a rooming house. Mr. Folk also, this is the corner here is George Street and Liberty Street. In the 1880s, 1890s, Charlestown had a kind of a mini boom, and there was need for office space. And this was an office building built by the man who owned this house, leased out. For a while, Lawson Botts was here. He was an attorney. He was later killed in 1862 in the midst of the Civil War. Mr. Falk had an office here, so several attorneys had offices here, and that's what it looks like today. It's on the corner of George and Liberty Street. Liberty Street here, George Street here, and of course this is the Judicial Building. This is the old Independent Fire Company. Today, the offices of an attorney in town. Questions? Let's go to Harpers Ferry. This is a photograph, we think, that was taken sometime after John Brown's raid in October of 1859. And of course, the photographer has his camera, and here's his photographic wagon. You can just see the top of it here. There are pictures taken looking up Shenandoah Street, and you can see this wagon very clearly. But the photographer has his camera pointed on Shenandoah Street, looking into the armory grounds along the Potomac River at Harpers Ferry. Big warehouse. And of course, this building took on some prominence. This is the first building as you come into the armory grounds. And this was the fire engine guardhouse where John Brown was captured the morning of October 18, 1859. So this became known, of course, as John Brown's Fort. Several pieces of this fencing are on display at Harpers Ferry in the John Brown exhibit building, taken from the Armory Wall entrance gates when they were removed in the 1880s. Notice too, there's every once in a while, there's a controversy about the bell in the cupola of John Brown's fort. And notice that if we're correct that this is following John Brown's raid, and before the Civil War, the bell is already missing. There's a controversy about the bell being removed and taken to Massachusetts, but it appears that the bell wasn't placed in the cupola of the fort until after John Brown's raid in October of 1859. This building, which is a forge building, very prominent, a lot of photographs of Harpers Ferry because of this huge smokestack. Now, John Brown's fort, original location. This is John Brown's fort in 1895. After the Civil War, the armory goes away. This building became surplus and it was purchased by several entrepreneurs, and they decided to make $1 off of it. So they took it apart, put it on a train and shipped it to Chicago. And in 1891, it was on display at the Chicago Exposition. The men who bought the fort were more interested than people who attended the fair, and it was a bust. Consequently, the fair was disassembled and stayed in Chicago. Through the great fortune and action by Kate Fields, who was a journalist in Washington, D.C., the fort was returned to Harpers Ferry. And this is where it was located in 1895. This is Alexander Murphy's farm on Bolivar Heights, and it's in the vicinity of where the present day visitor center is at Harpers Ferry National Historical Park. In 1903, Storr College decided that they wanted the fort on their campus. Storr College, although their charter said that they were open to students regardless of race, color, and creed, became principally an African-American school. And that was the case in 1903. They moved the fort from the Murphy farm to the campus of Storr College in 1909 to commemorate the 50th anniversary of John Brown's raid. You can see here in the background one of the buildings that was on the campus at Storr College. This is Lincoln Hall or Brackett Hall, a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful limestone building. The campus of Storr College was on Camp Hill on Fillmore Avenue, today where Mather Training Center and the Harpers Ferry Center are located. As a matter of fact, the brick box of the Harpers Ferry Center replaced both John Brown's fort and Brackett Hall. They were both removed and to make room for the new Harpers Ferry Center. Now, Brackett Hall went away, but of course, John Brown's fort didn't. It was moved into Lower Town, and this is a photograph of where it is today at the end of Shenandoah Street, across from where it was originally. Here it was originally. Today, this is 18 feet of fill dirt, and it's across the street. Who knows? The Park Service now has acquired the property. Who knows if the bank of dirt will be removed and the fort goes back to where it was originally. I don't think I'll live that long, but nevertheless, that is potential. Some of the rangers at Harpers Ferry say that John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave, but his fort keeps marching on. So maybe it has one more place to march back to its original location. Any questions? I'm betting nobody knows where this is. This house burned in 1864, right towards the end of the Civil War. There were several houses burned in Jefferson County in the summer of 1864 at the order of General David Hunter. One was here in Charlestown, Hunter's Hill, the home of Andrew Hunter, the prosecutor of John Brown. There were two homes in Shepherdstown, and this is one of those. This is Fountain Rock, the home of Alexander Butler. Butler at that time was a member of the Confederate Congress. So his house was burned. The house of Bedford, the house of Edmund Jennings Lee and his wife Henrietta, was also burned. In the mid-1880s, Shepherdstown began to have agricultural fairs, and they had them first at Morgan's Grove. Eventually, after Colonel William Morgan died, they had to find a new location. They just went right across the street, and they purchased the former Butler property at Fountain Rock. This is where Morgan's Grove Fair then moved to. And if you look real close, right above this French Surrey, there's the old house still standing. So Morgan's Grove Fair, 3 or 4 days. You can see folks brought tents. They stayed overnight. My wife's aunt had some of the cookware that her family used when they attended the fair, big coffee pot and a big skillet. So it was a big day, big opportunity. And this is roughly where the house was located when it was built in the 1840s. So the house here, home of Alexander Butler and his family, Fountain Rock, which was burned in the Civil War in 1864. Any questions? Now, sometimes there's a lot of change. Sometimes there's not much change. And incidentally, this is one of the oldest houses in Charlestown. This house was built by the Locke family. And incidentally, although today they spell it all L-O-C-K-E, the deeds for this house spells it the way you hear it, L-O-C-K. Native stone, and it's on the corner. The street in front of the house is Lawrence Street, and the street on the side of the house is Avis Street. So we're looking at the house as if we're standing on the playground of Wright Denny Intermediate School. So that's where the house is located. And you can see that hasn't changed very much. This is a photograph I took maybe in 2012. The Locke House was acquired by an African-American group in the post-Civil War era. And as you can see by the sign above the door there, this is Star Lodge #1. So it's a Masonic lodge and still used in that capacity today. So the building still exists and hasn't changed much since it was built in the 1780s. Back to Harpers Ferry, and what a great picture. I mean, just look at all that you can see here. First, of course, the gap, okay? And see the ripples there? What you're looking at is actually the roots of the mountain. That's what's left after this river has worn all that away. I tell people that when they visit the Harpers Ferry and drive along the Potomac River, they're seeing a young Grand Canyon. The Potomac is gradually digging a hole there. And maybe 400 million years from now, they'll create a canyon similar in size to the Grand Canyon. Now, what you can see, first, Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, coming around the bend at the base of Maryland Heights. This is Maryland Heights. Coming around the base of Maryland Heights. And look how tight that is. That's the track of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And it's coming on to this bridge. And this bridge is 2 lanes. Okay? The downstream side is where the rail tracks were. The upstream side, the wagon. Now, look at this. This train coming from Baltimore came to Harpers Ferry, turned around the corner here, turned around the corner onto the bridge, came across the bridge, and turned the corner there. and then came, you can see the elevated tracks here along the U.S. Armory ground. Okay. Now, every once in a while, you'll hear folks say, doggone it, you know, the railroad and the canal got to Harpers Ferry at the same time. And when the railroad got there, the canal was done. Don't you think that's the truth? Principally because of this bottleneck. Now just imagine a loaded train coming around here, slowing down, making a slow down. This is the lowest point in West Virginia. We're about 280 feet above sea level. When you get to Black Dog Coffee out at Bardane, you're getting to about 600 feet. So the train had to go from 280 feet here at Harpers Ferry to 600 feet at Bardane. And believe me, it was creeping by the time it got there. This, of course, is the bridge that John Brown crossed night of October the 16th. And he went into the armory. Here's the armory grounds. You can't see, I've looked and looked and looked and looked. You can't see the cupola of John Brown's fort, but it would be in here because here is the fence. There's the entrance to the armory ground. There's the fence. Right about here is where that cameraman was standing. There's the Potomac Restaurant, Wager House Hotel, and we're looking up the Potomac River into the armory grounds here. This is the administrative offices. This is a little warehouse. But this is Harpers Ferry as it appeared in late 1859, early 1860, before the Civil War began. And you can see the photograph is taken below Harpers Cemetery. Photographer standing on the bank there looking into the gap at Harpers Ferry. Now, this bridge was destroyed by the Confederate Army when they left Harpers Ferry in June of 1861. And here is the bridge that replaced it. It's called a Bowman Bridge, metal, and went up very quickly. A similar bridge was burned at Shepherdstown, and that bridge was never replaced for the entirety of the war. It didn't get replaced until 1870. And you can see this is about 1862, 63, not much left of the armory grounds. There's that big chimney. Restaurant, Wager House, Point, Gap. But this is the bridge that replaced this beautiful bridge after it was burned in June of 1861. This is early 1880s. This is the Bowman Bridge in the background. Up here it is. And this is a wagon bridge across the Shenandoah River into, then you're leaving West Virginia and coming into Virginia. So this went up towards Lovettsville and Hillsborough and that area. You visit, the bridge, of course, is gone, went away in 1936, but you can still see these beautiful stone piers there today if you visit the park and walk out to the point. And of course, this is what it looks like today. The B&O Railroad acquired the armory property in the 1880s, 1890s, and the first thing they did was drill a hole through the base of the mountain and began to straighten out this rail line to make it a little easier for trains to pull the grade at Harpers Ferry. This is, first of all, can you see Mr. Jacob Winnemore here? See, standing up against his house. He sold clothing principally. But that's where that building was located. Now that's McMurrin Hall in the background. And he had this little temporary shack built in that location and operated a store out of there from the 1870s into the 1880s. We went across just 2 doors down from the War Memorial Building in Shepherdstown, there on the corner of King and German Street. But after the Civil War, this was you'll see an example of this in Charlestown in just a minute. And incidentally, this house is still here today. It was moved twice. It went from here up on Duke Street, not too far from Elmwood Cemetery. And then it was moved once again out on Shoe Lane. And the house is still there today. And if you drive by, you can see this gable end. The gable end fronts German Street, and you can see where this house is today. This is Mr. Jacob Wintermoyer. Little horse in the background. This is King Street. Today, across the street there is where China Kitchen is, and also the municipal offices of the town of Shepherdstown. McMurrin Hall was built initially, given by Mr. Reason D. Shepherd, given to the town as the town hall. After the Civil War, for a period of time, the county seat left Charlestown, went to Shepherdstown, and this was the location of the county court. Originally just a central portion, they added 2 wings, and from 1865 to 1871, this was the seat of government in Jefferson County. Then given to Shepherd College, this is where they got it, and you'll see references in the newspaper. Things begin at the old college building, and that references to McMurrin Hall, the old college building. Photograph taken in the early 1890s. Very prominent location. This is where John Brown was executed. And you can see why the field was selected as the site for the hanging. Wide open, visibility to Harpers Ferry here on the left, visibility to the Berryville Turnpike here on the right. And this is the house built by Colonel John Thomas Gibson, the Gibson House. This is a photograph of the Gibson House right about the turn of the century. And of course, this is what it looks like today. Gibson House was just sold. Was on the market very briefly and was sold. There were experts who told you where X marked the spot where John Brown was executed, but there hasn't really been any reliable information disseminated about the exact location. Sometimes you can see sketches taken and kind of get a relative position. In one in particular that was looking east, you can see both the Baptist Church, which is just north of the Gibson House, and also Zion Episcopal. So you have a relative idea. But you see what this was a field owned by the Hunter family. Miss Rebecca Hunter owned all of this property, and that's why the executions took place at this location. Hilltop House. This is the original building of Hilltop House. And this is the front of the building that's looking into the gap. Pictured down here is Mr. Thomas Lovett, who built the hotel and was the operator. He and his family had previously operated summer rental buildings in several of the Store College buildings, Lockwood House, Brackett House. But in 1888, he decided to go out on his own and built his own hotel. Beautiful location. He expanded the building, and if you look closely, see the top of the gable here? There it is there. So you can see the location of the original building, and this is a little addition that he put on in the 1890s. Again, looking into the gap, which is off to the right here. Now, this building, a lot of bad luck there. This building burned in 1914 and was replaced by this construction. Fire again in 1919, and this was the replacement. This was a keeper, and after the Levitts sold the building in 1926, it remained that way. And of course, this is what the building looks like today. It appears that there is some movement, and that a new Hilltop House will give us what is certainly one of the more picturesque views in all of Jefferson County. You know, it's interesting though too, in the 1890s, two of the biggest hotels in Jefferson County were both operated by African Americans. Mr. Lovett had Hilltop House here at Harpers Ferry, and Mr. James Wormley had the Powhatan Hotel, which he renamed Wormley House, located on 3rd Avenue and Mildred Street in Ranson. Later became home to the Powhatan School for Women and then St. Hilda's Hall. That building burned in 1938. Any questions? Two bridges in Jefferson County, one at Shepherdstown and one at Harpers Ferry. And on the Shenandoah River, there are two ferries, and this is one of those. This is the ferry at Manning's. Now, if you can envision the Bloomery going across the old Route 9, which is 115 today, it crosses Evetts Run, and this was the first bridge built across Evetts Run. The portrait was done by John Perendo Conklin. His nickname was Wren, self-taught artist. This happens to be here in the museum. There are several of these paintings done by the Conklins. One is in Happy Retreat, and I've seen a couple elsewhere. The Conklins' connection to Happy Retreat, they purchased the property from the Mitchell family in the 1920s and operated their construction firm out of there, also built furniture there. The museum has a chair or two and tables that were built by the Conklins. But this is the Bloomery crossing Evetts Run in the just about the turn of the century. Now, the first bridge built at the Bloomery was this bridge. It was called the Daly Bridge for the local families, built in 1926. And if any of you ever crossed that bridge, you know that on this end, as it went across the river, you ran smack dab into the Blue Ridge Mountain, had to make a very quick left-hand turn to go up the mountain. And of course, this is the bridge today, replacing the Daly Bridge. Yellow. 1800s, early 1900s, Jefferson County had many, many small communities, and this is the church in one of those communities. Every community had CSS. Every community had a church, they had a store, and they had a school. And this is the Union Church for Cabletown. And that's what you see today. Union Church because it was used by all denominations. There's also a Union Church at Middleway, still existing today. I've got a picture of it, we'll see just a second. Jefferson County had 43 mills operating in the 1800s because this is the leading wheat producing county in the state. State of Virginia up until 1863, and then post-Civil War, Jefferson County continued to be leading agricultural county in the state of West Virginia. So on every run, every creek, every stream in Jefferson County, there was at least one mill. This is on the Bullskin at Cabletown. And the Bullskin had 3 or 4 or 5 mills, including a woolen mill at the mouth, run by the Cable family. Gone today. This guy's one of my favorites. This is at the time Lieutenant Colonel William Dark. And this is at the battle against the Miami Indians in 1791. Things didn't come out so good for the U.S. troops. They lost 600 men, were chased out of the area, and Colonel Dark lost his son. Colonel Dark's home is at Duffields, and just down the street from the intersection of Skeetertown Road and the Shepherdstown Pike. This was his a residence on his property. There's a lot of apocryphal stories about what it was and what it wasn't. but this is on the property owned by General Dark. He was given a brigadier generalship by the Virginia militia in the 1790s. And that's what this house looks like today. Harry Jenkins lives there. If you've ever visited Schoolhouse Ridge, this is the schoolhouse that gave it its name. There was a schoolhouse just below Bolivar, served the Halltown district. Jefferson County was one of the few counties east or west of the Blue Ridge which went to free public schools for white students prior to the Civil War. And this was the school for one of those districts. There were 27 individual school districts. And if you look at the 1852 S. Hal Brown map, you'll see all those school districts enumerated. Of course, it took great fame in 1862 when the Confederate Army, commanded by General Jonathan Stonewall Jackson, approached Harpers Ferry and surrounded the town, captured the Union garrison there, had artillery placements on Schoolhouse Ridge. And that's the building that is in the approximate location of where the schoolhouse was. That's what it is today. It's part of the U.S. Homeland Security down outside of Halltown.
Next to you.
That property today. This is the Halltown Chapel, photograph taken in the 1940s. This chapel served the African American community in Halltown. The property was given to a group of folks by the Lucas family. And if you look at the construction, all of this was done of an evening on the weekends, built by members of the congregation. Great work. And of course, still there today. There is an effort to try to continue restoration. A good friend of mine, Mr. George King, in the 1980s started an effort to try to restore the building because of its historic significance, and that work continues today. Now, believe it or not, this is Charlestown. This is East Washington Street. The photographer's roughly in front of the courthouse. And this building is the Carter House Hotel, where the Bank of Charlestown is located today. Next door, that's where the Skinner Law Firm is. And then the old Co House up on the corner. But you can see folks hanging around the Carter House Hotel, photograph taken in the 1870s. This is looking the other way, looking west. Sadler Building, just barely see the front of Charles Washington or the Charles Washington Hall. This is the Watson House where the United Bank is today. 3-story then, eventually a 4-story hotel. So you had hotels on either side of the public square in Charlestown. Always a story of Harpers Ferry. This is following the flood of 1936. You can see they're trying to remove some of the debris. The building on the right corner here, this is where the John Brown exhibit is today. And you can see this is just about the last straw. The 36 flood just devastated Lower Town Harpers Ferry. 42 finished what 36 didn't get done. And this is what Main Street, Shenandoah Street, Harpers Ferry looked like in the early 1950s after acquisition by the National Park Service. The building on the left is today where the public restrooms are. Headquarters of the Harpers Ferry Park Association are off here to the left, the bookshop on the first floor. But this is entrance into the women's restroom at Harpers Ferry Park. This building today is the industrial exhibit. In the 1970s, my friend Arnold Schofield was a blacksmith, and the then superintendent decided we were going to do living history, and Arnold worked his magic with a hammer and tongs and made horseshoes inside this building. But today it represents the armory and work done on Virginius Island. You can just barely see, it's cut off here, but there's an artist who is seated across the street from these buildings and sketching this view of Harpers Ferry in the 1950s. This German street, Shepherdstown, 1861, early in the war, and we're standing roughly at the four-way stop and looking east on German Street. Of course, most prominent is Trinity Episcopal Church. This building is removed, it was on the corner of German and Church Street, and where the Civil War Center is down here. This is a shot of the bridge across Teague's Run at the bottom of the hill, just outside of Shepherdstown on the River Road. Now, this bridge, of course, is not there anymore. There's a concrete culvert and asphalt over the top. But if you look down here, that's the cement mill where the Battle of the Cement Mill took place following the Battle of Antietam, September 19th and 20th, 1862. So Shepherdstown is behind us. And this is when the entry road from the river into Shepherdstown was High Street. Of course, today the entry road into Shepherdstown from the river is German Street. That was moved in the 19-teens when the Norfolk and Western Railroad moved the rail tracks, and they wanted to limit the number of access points across their tracks, and consequently the road was moved at that time. Charlestown, 1865, the corner of Washington Street and George Street. The building that was there was destroyed in 1862 by the Union Army as they withdrew, being chased by the Confederate Army in May of 1862. So if you remember, Jacob Wintermoyer had a similar setup, one-story, gable front, commercial building, and they were intended to be moved. But this is how Charlestown tried to get back in gear after 4 years of Civil War. And this is the building that replaced it. So the original market house on the northwest corner of George and Washington Street was destroyed during the Civil War and replaced by this new building, which became known as Charles Washington Hall. Just as today, 3 bays. George Light, who was the mayor of Charlestown for many years, was in this central bay, had a store in there, had sold notions, rented books, and you can see the Watson House is now Owen's house. So the hotel has changed ownership, but is still a hotel here in 1874. How many of you knew Bolivar had a castle? Well, here's proof of it. This building was built on Bolivar Heights, roughly where the parking area is. If you visit the Bolivar battlefield and park your car, off to the side there is where this house was built. It was built by a Union soldier who was in Harpers Ferry sometime during the Civil War and vowed to come back and build a house. Well, he did. And in 1889, he bought property. This was owned by Store College. He bought property from Store College, bought the lot, and built this house in 1889. His name was Royal Whitman. When the Park Service acquired, this is part of the Bolivar Heights battlefield. When the Park Service acquired the property in the 1950s, at that time, the focus of Harpers Ferry was 1859, 1861, John Brown's raid to 65 to the end of the Civil War. So consequently, they made a decision to remove some buildings which didn't fit that tight scheme. And this is one of them that went. The building was removed in 1962 and no evidence, but fortunately, a complete set of photographs was taken to remind us of what was there from 1890 to 1960. This is Shepherdstown in the 1850s. This is the first bridge across the Potomac River at Shepherdstown, and it replaced a ferry. The ferry had been operated initially by the Swearingen family from 1755 until they sold it to the Blackford family in the 1820s. The ferry went roughly maybe 50 yards downstream from the bridge. This again, just like the bridge at Harpers Ferry, is covered 2 lanes, but Princess Street, which is the access to the bridge, was reconfigured. Now, if you visit Harpers Ferry today, you see where the cursor is. That's the tobacco warehouse at Shepherdstown on the as Princess Street comes down, and Princess Street comes down more like this, adjacent to the tobacco warehouse. But in 1852, this is from the Hal Brown map of 1852, you came down the hill and made a big left-hand turn. This is a warehouse owned by the Shepherd family, and then pulled onto the bridge and came across. This is Bridgeport, little village on the other side of the Potomac River in Maryland. Lots of homes there. If you visit the canal, you can still see where this bridgehead and abutment are located on both sides. Now, the woman seated here is sitting on the abutment, which was here. This is what was left after the flood of 1936. And from between the period 36 until the James Rumsey Bridge was built in 39, if you wanted to go from Shepherdstown to Sharpsburg, this is how you had to go. You went across on a ferry, vice versa, from Sharpsburg to Shepherdstown on a ferry. But this is one of my favorite photographs because you can see it all. You've got ferry, you've got automobile, and down here on the track, you've got the Norfolk and Western Railroad headed to Hagerstown. And if you look real close, you can see the C&O Canal. So you've got canal, auto, ferry, and railroad all in one picture. Summertime and before municipal pools, this is how people cooled off. Now, this is a photograph of the B&E swimming grounds on the Shenandoah River. B for Blessing and E for Eby. These two fellas teamed up. They built some bathhouses. You can see they've anchored diving platforms out here in the middle of the river. This is roughly where Moulton Park is today on the Shenandoah River, just off of old Route 9, present day 115. Folks at Harpers Ferry went on the Shenandoah as well. And this is along the shore adjacent to Virginius Island. And occasionally today, you'll see people taking advantage of the Shenandoah and swimming in the river. Here's another little community. This is at Duffield's. You hear in the news today about the renovation and restoration of the B&O depot at Duffield's. Well, this was the B&O passenger station on the other side of the tracks. It was located where the parking lot is today for commuters who catch the train at Duffield, going into Washington in the morning, coming home in the evening. And as you cross the tracks headed to Shepherdstown, there still remains of this old frame building, which was, as you can see, Kibler store in Duffields. This photograph was taken in the 1890s. Just like the Lock House didn't change, neither did this little church. This is the Union Church, or White Church because of its color, in Middleway. And doesn't look a whole lot different today. So, these are some of my favorites. And it's not an easy thing to do. But I think of all of our photographs, the entire collection, I think that this still remains my favorite. First of all, looking at that beautiful gap, the C&O Canal, the bridge that carried John Brown across, the bridge that carried rail traffic, wagon traffic. Harpers Ferry was a boom town. When this photograph was taken, Harpers Ferry was the most populous of the incorporated towns in Jefferson County. Had over 1,700 residents. But this, I think, is at least in the top 3 of all the pictures of Jefferson County that I include as among my favorites. So, hope you've seen something maybe you didn't see before, learned something that you didn't know, and hope that we'll have an opportunity to do this again. So I'll take questions. If anybody has a question.
Hi, this is Alan Engelberg. This is being recorded. Where will people be able to see this after today?
Our intention is to put this on the museum website.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say I really enjoyed the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it too. Any day that I get to talk about Jefferson County is a good day.
Well, I think everybody learned something today.
Oh, absolutely.
Even how to use Zoom. This is the first time I've been on Zoom.
This is the first time, and I'll tell you what, it's okay, but I'd rather see your face. I miss that. So I'm hoping the next time we do this, that we'll be face to face, we can see each other.
Yes. I'd much rather be person to person too.
Absolutely.
This was a good substitute.
Yes.
And thank you for taking the time to do this.
Enjoyed it. My pleasure. My pleasure. Okay.
I really enjoyed it.
Good.
I moved to Jefferson County in '90, and I've had no idea of what it was about. So this is really great.
Good. Good. Well, tune in. We'll do it again and learn some more.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yes, indeed. And thanks to each of you. I know you got plenty of things to do. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. And again, all these photographs, first of all, you can see most of them you can see on our website, so you can take a peek for yourself. And if you have an interest in that, explore our webpage and look at that. But when things get back to normal, whenever that is, please visit the museum. I'd be glad to talk with you and show you these things, because we really do. And I know I'm prejudiced, but we really do have a rich history. And fortunately, we have a good representation of what things used to look like here in Jefferson County. Okay, I'm signing off.